Testing. Hello. Okay, audio is working. Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of these second channel updates. Today, I'm coming at you with an even worse camera than yesterday. Hold on. I gotta put wide angle. There, look at that. Now you can see around. This camera doesn't go very wide. This is as wide as it goes. So a little 0.5 filter on there helps out. This is a Sony TG1 camcorder, little titanium old camcorder. It was a very premium thing back in the day. I think it was like an $800 camera or something. I got it for $70. Pretty cool. One of my favorite things about it, it's got clean HDMI out, so I'm not even recording on it right now. It's just being capture carded in because there is quite a hefty record limit on this thing. It doesn't recognize SD cards over a certain number of megabytes, so there's usually, like currently it says I have 27 minutes of video left, so it fills up pretty quick. But clean HDMI out on an old camcorder like this is pretty sick. Look at this guy. That's a future video right there. That is a Sony RX0 action camera with a 1-inch sensor that I put a cable in it. So this is a USB dummy battery, and I chopped the USB off and wired it to a battery plate for a different 3.7 volt camcorder battery. So basically now it's just got a bigger battery plate on the back. And then there's this is not the final thing for the video. We'll be like making a nice cage for it that has that like hard mounted. But the current solution just for testing was bending a little metal plate, gluing a filter thread to it. And it just kind of holds the battery in place. So that's a little jank guy, but you see the vision. This is a super cheap dash cam with LED lights on the front of it, and it only works when you plug it into mini USB right there, because it's meant to run off car power. But I found out if I plug it into this giant NPF battery, it actually runs. So I can run the dash cam as a handheld camera by just carrying it with any USB battery pack. That's the Sony a6600 that I broke. Actually ended up shooting some of the wedding yesterday on that, but it's broken in several regards. So electronic lens mount doesn't work, so it doesn't know anything about the lens, so you can't change the aperture, no autofocus, which I can deal with. The biggest issue with it is that it doesn't know what focal length it's at. So for the purposes of IBIS, I guess the sensor shift for in-body image stabilization has to work differently depending on what focal length the lens is at. So if you're using like a vintage lens that doesn't electronically communicate with the camera, you have to tell the camera, hey, this is a 50 millimeter lens. Hey, this is a 35 millimeter lens. And I was using zoom lenses, and it's not recognizing it because the electronic points are broken. So every time I zoom in or out for the stabilization to work, I have to adjust the steady shot focal length. But most of the day I was on a Canon 70-200, which I would show you if it was up here. It's downstairs. And the 24-100. So most of the day I just had it set to 105, and I was pretty much zoomed in on that the whole time, and then switched to the 200 later. Solid camera. It's just a shame it's broken. Oh, and then my adapter from Sony E mount to EF mount is also broken. At some point, I guess it got dropped while there was a big lens on it, and the lens broke some of the bolts. Hold on, I'll show you. So 2 of these screws that hold on this flange, those 2 are alive. Those 2 are broken because I guess there was a big lens on it. It took a hard knock this way. And so now whenever you put a lens on it, there's a little bit of flex. Which does cause focus issues if you're, not holding it in right. So that's another thing to be careful with. So kind of a jank setup, but that's the story with this thing right now. I've got a mod vid for this. I'm gonna tinker heavily with this camera. And then what else? I'm just going through random things. This is a Canon EOS IX, I believe, old APS film camera. I just got back some shots from it. I'll do a whole video on that camera. It takes EF lenses but shoots in APS, which, if you don't know about, the reason APS-C digital sensors are called APS-C is because of this line of cameras, the APS Advanced Photo System. So it was supposed to, in the late 90s and early 2000s, Advanced Photo System was supposed to replace 35 millimeter film, or be a more consumer-friendly, intro-friendly alternative. It was in theory easier. These are the cartridges, and so instead of having to like manually spool everything, you would stick them in. There's these little indicators on top that tell you if the film is partially shot, fully shot, developed, so you never get confused about it, and it's supposed to rewind itself. So you can like half shoot a roll, rewind it, switch your ISO to a different roll, and then put it back in, and it'll resume halfway where it left off. Cool ideas, but it ended up being pretty finicky. So that film format died in 2011, was the last film they made in it. So it's all heavily expired, but my goal at some point is hopefully to rewind or cut some 35 millimeter down to this size, make like some kind of custom cutting mechanism so that I can do all that in the dark and re-spool some other film as APS and kind of revive this weird era of cameras. But the reason APS became APS-C is APS was kind of dying out as digital was coming in. Digital sort of killed it. And so the first round of digital cameras that they did were mostly scrapped APS film cameras that they redeveloped a digital sensor into. So APS, in pursuit of a consumer-friendly 35 millimeter film alternative, ended up actually unintentionally paving the way for smaller sensor digital cameras, or digital cameras in general, because this was smaller than 35 millimeter film. And in the early days of digital sensors, you can have a much smaller sensor. So a lot of those APS cameras got rebuilt as digital cameras. APS film had a feature where the film canister had a magnetic strip on it that could record data, and each shot would record some data about it, and you could put a crop on it depending on the aspect ratio you wanted. And then when they would develop your film, they would go and crop each shot for you depending on the aspect ratio you selected on the camera for that shot. Here's another APS camera. This one's more of a point and shoot. So your three options for aspect ratios were APS-C, APS-H, and APS-P. So P was panorama, a very wide crop. H was high quality, I believe, something like that. That was the full frame of the film that you were taking, which, funny enough, in this format was 16:9, not 3:2. And then C was a more traditional 3:2 crop. So H was 16:9, C was 3:2, and P was some other super wide format. So then when they went to make digital sensors, they made them in the APS-C crop, but there are digital cameras that exist that are APS-H from the very early days, and I guess those were maybe more video targeted cameras that were 16:9 sensors. That was APS-H. I don't believe anybody ever made an APS-P camera, but that would be pretty sweet. This camera is a Canon 45th anniversary, I think, or maybe 50, I don't know, something like that. Gold edition of the Canon ELPH Ixus, which is the predecessor to my point and shoot that I carry around all the time. Unfortunately, this is mostly useless, although it's pretty cute, because this is all automatic. There's no manual settings. So with expired film, you usually want to shoot way brighter. You want to overexpose because the film kind of degrades over time. But on this, there's no way to do that. So because it's expired and you can't intentionally overexpose it, it ends up being very underexposed. But with this one, I can intentionally overexpose and get some slightly usable things. I would show you on the computer, but I already unplugged my hard drives. About to go on a little road trip, just away for like a day or so. Got a couple of things to do around my hometown. But anyhow, that's some camera yap sessions on the Sony TG1. Let me know if you enjoyed and if you got motion sick during this episode. Oh, there's the setup from yesterday, the top-down rig that was spun out. I gotta figure that out. But that's all for today. I'll see you tomorrow.